If somebody sends you a workbook with words that you don't understand, why not go ahead and look them up to get the definition of them? You can do that by coming up here, clicking on the Review tab, going to the Proofing group. Now, before you click on the Research button, go ahead and select the cell that contains the word or words that you want to research. You don't have to, but it makes it a lot easier in some instances. Like, for example, when I click on it, opens up the task pane, and in the Search For field, it pulls in the contents of the cell that I have selected. So if I understand contact but not manager and I want to look up that word, all I have to do is go ahead and delete the contact word by double clicking on it. To select it, hit the delete key on the keyboard, and there you go. Now I'm searching for manager. Well, you can type it in if you want, but in any case, that is an option. And then click on the drop down arrow, because by default it wants to search Bing, which is Microsoft search engine, or you get the other options here, but I want to get the definition of it, so I'll select the dictionary, and there you go. Manager is an organizer of business, somebody who is responsible for directing, controlling, and whipping everybody into shape. No, it doesn't say that, but there's the definition. And then if you want to go ahead and use the thesaurus, which is, well, basically it looks up words that are similar to manager, then click on the drop-down arrow and go to thesaurus. And also, that means that basically the same thing as manager are the words like boss, director, executive. And if you want to use boss and say, hey, I like that, that sounds a lot better than manager. Or another reason why you may want to use the thesaurus is because if you use manager a lot in your worksheet here, you talk about manager here, manager there, it might be an overuse of the words, so you may want to find something that means basically the same thing so you don't become blind to manager. Maybe you want to use boss, director, if it fits. In any case, to go ahead and insert it, you can do it one of a couple of ways. You can either go ahead and click on the drop-down arrow to insert that word there, or right-click, it brings up the same shortcut menu. Select Insert, and it overwrites everything within that cell. Now, if you don't want to overwrite everything and still have contact there, then let's go ahead and undo that. You can right-click and go to Copy, and then go ahead and come up here in the Formula bar and double-click on Manager, and then Control-V as in Victor to paste, and there you go, Contact Boss. Let's go ahead and undo that. Or when you look this up, if you're like, I like boss, is there something that closely resembles that you want to look up and search for boss? Right now we're searching for manager and all the synonyms for it, but if I click on boss, now I can't click on it, and the reason why is because I'm in edit mode. You see the cursor, how it's flashing in the cell? Hit the escape key to get out of it. Then go ahead and click on boss, and it replaces manager up at the top, and now it's searching for synonyms for boss in the thesaurus. And I can go ahead and choose one and say it's the chief. And then click on that if I want to look up chief to see if there's something that closely resembles chief as a synonym. And I'm getting kind of off track here. In any case, when you're ready, give it a right click and insert or copy and paste. A watermark is inserting text or images into every worksheet, not just in the top or the bottom, which would be the header and footer sections, but in the middle of it somewhere. I mean, it doesn't have to be exactly in the middle. And that text or image is going to be faded or washed out. That's what a watermark is. It appears on every page and it's faded, because you don't want that when it's sitting behind the data here interfering and obstructing what you can see up in front of it, which is, well, for quarter 3, store number 45 is 43,000. So to insert a watermark or an image, as you can see up here, the title is Santa's Toy Store. I want to insert an image of Santa about somewhere here. I want to go to the header section of my worksheet. And you can do that one of two ways. If you want to watch the header and footer training video, you'll be able to easily get right into this because we did pretty much something along the same lines. Now, I can get into the header section of my worksheet here by either coming up here and clicking on the Page Layout tab, going to the Page Setup group and clicking on its expandable dialog box button, clicking on the Header and Footer tab, and I want to customize the header sections, so once it opens up, I can insert the image in the left, center, or right sections. Once I insert it, I can hit Enter on the keyboard several times to push it down towards the center of the worksheet. So I can insert the image here if you want, or click Cancel, Cancel. You can also come up here on the Insert tab, go to the Text group, and click on Header and Footer. Now when I do that, it changes view. Let me come up here and click on the View tab, and it takes me to the Page Layout view. Now the reason why we can't see it, or that it's not highlighted saying, okay, this is the view that you're in, is because I'm actually in the header section. You see the rest of the worksheet down below and it says header up at the top. There's the left, center, and right sections. When I click outside of it into the worksheet, then you can see that it's highlighted Page Layout. And then I get my other views. It switched us from the normal view to the Page Layout. So this will disappear and I won't be able to select it once I come up here and click anywhere in the header section. So keep that in mind. Now to insert a picture of Santa, let's come up here to its Related Contextual Design tab since I'm in the page layout view, and go to the header and footer elements, click on picture, opens up window. Now I can browse for a file on my computer if I have Santa Claus somewhere on my computer, and I don't, so I'll go ahead and click in the office.com clipart search field and type in Santa, and then hit enter. Oh, there's quite a few Santa Clauses. Let's go ahead and scroll through and find one really quick that will fit nicely into my worksheet. Okay, how about just the hat of Santa? Why not? Go ahead and select it, click on Insert. It inserts it as code, and so when I click outside of it, of the header section, you can actually see the image. When I click back in it, then it's still there. I can move the cursor in front of the code here and hit enter a couple of times, then click out and start gauging it how I want it to appear in my worksheet here, or on every single worksheet, because remember that anything in the header or footer section is going to appear on every worksheet. So it could be right there, come back up here, add a few more, hit enter a few more times, and then click out of it, and oh, almost there. Now let's come back up here and hit 2 more times, click off. Okay, that's about right. Now it's a bit bold, and so to go ahead and wash it, let's come back up here and click in the center section, and in there, with it selected, let's come up here in the header and footer element section, click on Format Picture, go to the Picture tab, change it from the default color, and go to a washout. Now there are the settings where the brightness is 85% and contrast is 15%. Click Okie dokie, and you can barely see it. It's not too bad. At least it doesn't interfere with the text in front of it. I can still read it. But in any case, you can go ahead and tweak that by clicking on it and on the Picture tab and sliding it less bright, more contrast. You can go ahead and play with that. I'll click Cancel, click off in a blank area, and once I'm done, and I want to go back to the normal view, then come up here, click on the View tab, go to the Workbook Views group and click on Normal. Now if you can't see Normal, well, you can see it, but you can't access it, then make sure that you're not sitting in the header section or the footer section. Just click somewhere in the main part of your worksheet here and go back to Normal. And then to see what it looks like in the print preview before you print it off, click on the File tab, go to Print. Hey, that's not too bad. We can even zoom in. Go to the bottom right hand corner, zoom to page. Let's go ahead and scroll over. Oh, that's nice. And then don't forget, if you want to insert page numbers, those basic things that we covered in the header and footer training videos. While you're in the print preview, click on Page Setup, the link, go to the header and footer section, customize the footer, and it's got the page number, but if we want to go ahead, delete that, insert page of number of pages, then that's going to tell somebody that if you have, more than 2 pages and they only see 1 of 5, then you know that they're missing 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that can be helpful. Click Okie dokie, and there's 1 of 1. Of course, that's all I've got because I don't have enough data to fill 2, 3, or more pages. Now also the grid lines, if you want those printed off, because you can see right now, well, they're not going to be printed. Come back here to the front stage, go to the Page Layout tab, and then over here to the Sheet Options. Grid lines, you can only view them. By default, they're not going to be printed, but if you want them printed, go ahead and check it. Click File, go down to Print. There you go. You get the grid lines for at least the range of data that you have available in your worksheet. Assuming that you see my Level 1 training video on applying themes, now it's more than just learning how to apply themes, it's the whole history and the story behind themes. If you don't understand that, then this isn't going to make much sense. In any case, assuming that you've seen it, let's go ahead and learn how to customize our themes by coming up here and clicking on the Page Layout tab, going to the Themes group, and as a quick review, a theme is a collection of pre-formatted elements that's applied as a whole to the entire workbook, and those elements include colors, fonts, and effects. So when I click on the drop-down arrow, one of these built-in themes here includes different colors, or a theme of colors, complementary colors. Now don't confuse the themes here when I refer to the theme of colors, because these elements in and of themselves are complementary or a theme. So you've got colors that hopefully complement each other, that when you choose them, you don't have something that's so off the color chart that they don't complement each other and it looks like a bad 70s show. In any case, you do have complementary colors, so they would be a theme. Complementary fonts for your headings and the body of the font. You wouldn't want a heading font being in some Gothic and then the body of the font being in something that's really not even close to something that resembles Gothic, but yet you want it close enough so you can distinguish a little bit between the two. Again, they're themes in and of themselves. But for the collection, you can get them all here in one click. Like you get one color theme for facet and one font theme, and also the effects. If you don't like that, then you can tweak it. So let's go ahead and click off, and actually let's click on the colors drop down arrow and say as far as the colors that are available. If I want to create my own custom theme color, then come down here and click on Customize Colors. And you can see it says Theme Colors. Again, in and of themselves, they are themes, and all three of them are applied to the built-in themes here. Now when you look at it, over to the right-hand side, you got samples. So when you choose colors, you can basically compare light text against a dark background, or dark text against a lighter background, so you don't have something that's light against light background. Then you won't be able to see it, of course, very well, if at all. So when you look over here and you're looking at the ones and the twos, basically the ones are your choice of text and shapes, and these twos are for borders and backgrounds. So when it comes to selecting something dark, that means dark against a light background. So there's black against the lighter background, and there's light against a dark background. So you can see over here what you choose if you want something light, to see if it goes well with the dark background or if it blends in too much. So if I choose something hot pink, okay, there you go. That still stands out. It doesn't blend in completely, so I can't see the text there, so that's a good indicator. Then you have the different accents for your shapes here and objects, how you want to accent them. Also, it applies to your charts here. And then hyperlinks, before you click on a link, the typical is blue. You can make it yellow. Okay, doesn't blend too well over here with the light text background. And then once they click on it, to show them that they have clicked on it, that it's been used, then you can say, okay, let's do something like green. So before, after. Before you click on it, then after you click on it. Once you go ahead and you create your custom theme of colors like Spiffy Colors, go ahead and type in a name for it, click Save, and there you go. Click on Colors drop down arrow, there's Spiffy. You can go ahead and select that to apply it to your workbook here. And I really haven't deviated from it that much, so it's not going to make a huge difference here. Then of course you have your fonts. When you click on the drop down arrow, that when you hover over any one of these here, let's go down to Arial. Notice that when I hover over these, that this section right here doesn't change. It's down below this section here. And we covered this in my level 1 training video on applying themes. That when you select a cell that contains font, that's part of a theme. How do you know it's part of a theme? You can come up here and click on the Home tab, go to the font group, click on the drop down arrow, and there you go. You have the theme section, then you have all the other generic fonts. Well, I say generic, but those that aren't themes. So by default, the body of the text is going to be Calibri. So when I select any one of these cells, it's going to be Calibri. If I want to go ahead and say, okay, for my headings, or for the cells here, I want those to be my headings, then I can come up here, click on the drop down arrow, and select Cambria, and notice those are the heading fonts. So when I come back up here to the page layout and choose my fonts, notice that everything else gets updated because it's tied to the theme fonts, where these right here, the cells, they aren't part of the theme fonts. I just went on the Home tab, clicked on the drop down arrow. You can see up at the top, Arial isn't the current theme, so it's not going to be part of it. In fact, even if I switch it to the current theme, you can still have Arial down below here and have Arial up here as the current theme, and they can be in two different worlds. Point being, as I mentioned in my level 1 training video, is that when you install Excel for the first time and you open it up, if you don't mess with it, the default are going to be theme fonts. That is, when I say you don't mess with it, you don't come in here and you say, okay, let me change all these, and click on the drop down arrow and go outside of the theme fonts and choose something else, because when I do that, like even when I scroll down to Arial, you can see over here it doesn't say body or it doesn't say heading. That when I come back up here to the page layout tab, click on fonts, move it around, basically it doesn't do anything, well, except for the fonts over here because I didn't select those. Those are still part of the theme fonts. In any case, let me go ahead and undo that. So if you want to go ahead and change and update all the font at the same time by using themes, then don't change your fonts here and go down outside of the themes. Leave them as the themes, and if you want to change your fonts, those fonts that are in headings or the rest that are in body, don't come down here, because otherwise you won't be able to use themes again unless you bring them back up here and change them to the current theme. Come back over here to the Page Layout tab and change your fonts by clicking on the Fonts drop-down arrow. Well, the question you have is, well, what if they don't have the fonts that I want? What if they don't have the, well, for my heading font, I don't want it to be Cambria. I want it to be something else, and I can't find it here. That's okay. Come down here and click on Customize Fonts. Choose your heading fonts, like let's do Comic Sans. Ooh, that's always fun. I don't know, Calibri. Sure, why not? We'll leave it as is, and we'll call it Fonts. And then hit Enter, and it's saved. So when I want to use this again, click on the Fonts drop-down arrow, and it's right there. You can right-click on it to edit it or delete it. Also with the colors, click on the drop-down arrow to right-click to edit or delete it. As far as the effects go, what you see is what you get. Excel hasn't, up until this version, 2013, allowed us to tweak the different effects here as far as the glossiness, the matte, the shadows, well, the different effects. Then once you go ahead and you customize the elements here, you like the colors, you applied it, you like the fonts, you applied it, you've chosen an effect, like maybe something subtle. Once you're done with all that, and you're like, I really like this. I don't want to have to do this all over again. Then go ahead and take a snapshot of all these elements that you tweaked, that you applied, or that are currently being applied to your workbook, and click on the Themes drop-down arrow and go ahead and save the current theme. So it opens it up into the Documents Theme folder under the Templates folder. Let's call it Spiffy, and then hit Enter, and it's saved. So when I click on the drop-down arrow, it's in the Custom section. You can right-click on it to delete it. As far as customizing it goes, well, just go back and tweak the colors, the fonts, the effects, then go ahead and click on Save Current Theme and overwrite your original Spiffy theme here with those updates. So just double click on it. Do you want to overwrite it, replace it, say yes, and there you go. Now make sure that you watch all the previous training videos on themes so you have an idea what I'm talking about here. Now the basics are, every time you create a new workbook, the default font is going to be body font, which automatically allows you to use the themes feature right off the bat. And that means that when you come up here and click on the Page Layout tab, you go to the Themes group and you want to change the font throughout the entire workbook, you can click on the Themes Fonts drop-down arrow and choose anything that's listed here. Of course, if it's nothing that you like here, you can always customize it as we learned in the previous training video. Now, having said that, I don't use theme fonts. So every time I create a new workbook, the font that I use is Arial, and it's not going to be part of a theme. So how do I go ahead and customize that? I come up here and click on the File tab, go backstage down to Options, General selected by default, and I change to use this as the default font from up here, Body, to Arial. And like I said, the body font is the default font type for all new workbooks, unless you come back here like I did and set it to Arial. So every time I go File to New and create a new workbook, you can see that Arial, when I click on the drop-down arrow, you can see at the bottom of the list it's selected. When you scroll up to the top, it's not part of a theme font. Let me go ahead and close out of that. Otherwise, if you're going to use themes, then this isn't going to be a big deal. But if you want a mixture of it, like I have here, notice that in the upper database, when I select any cell within it, and I come up here on the Home tab, Arial is selected, and you can see down at the bottom, it doesn't have body next to it. You can scroll up to the top, you can see it's not a theme font. And when I select a cell down below in this database, it's Calibri. Now make sure that it's part of a theme font, because Calibri may not be. If you mess around with it, you can still click on the drop-down arrow and choose it down below here outside of the theme font, but it is because, like I say, when I click on the drop-down arrow, you can see that it's highlighted in green. So when I come over here to the Page Layout tab, and I'm talking about fonts only, not the other elements, just the fonts, when I click on the drop-down arrow, notice that bottom database there, the second one, that when I hover over any one of these other types of themes here, it updates that, but it doesn't update the database up top in the pretty blue. So now it's in Corbel or Candera. Ooh, that sounds fun. Select that. So when I have it selected here, come up here on the Home tab, Candera. So you can have a mixture and say, okay, if I want to update this range here in a single click, make sure that it's set to a body font. If I want to update this range here, then I can't use a font outside of the body font. I have to come up here, click on the drop-down arrow and say you're going to be whatever the current body font is, and that's Candera. See, now I can go ahead and click on the Page Layout tab, choose the fonts, and everything gets updated, well, as far as the fonts go. Let me go ahead and undo that so it's back to Arial. So you can mix this if you want. It's just, how do you want to start off your workbook? Do you want to start off where everything is easily updated in a single click with theme fonts, by going backstage and making sure it says body font for the default font that you're going to be using? Or do you want to do it like I did, just go ahead and say the default font's going to be Arial, not a body font, and then just come in here and select Arrange, and then come up here on the Home tab and choose, scroll up to the top, that as the body, and then come on to Worksheet 2, choose Arrange, and choose that as Candera, maybe Worksheet 3, of course the rest are in Candera here. So it's updating the entire workbook. It's just this range right here that I converted to something outside of the body font. Excel has some workbook templates that you may find helpful, like when you're creating something from scratch, an invoice or a purchase order. Why do all the work when it's already been done for you and all you have to do is just tweak it? In other words, you may not like the colors, the type of font, but you can tweak that if you like the overall layout of the template. And to take a look at these templates, come up here and click on the File tab, go down to New, and there you go, a bunch of templates here. Notice that when you hover over one, after you do some searches, if you really like that template and you want it to be in your top, I don't know how many's here, 20, then go ahead and click on the Pin to List, and you see the pin is pushed in. Well, it's not pushed in, it's now turned up. So that way, as we toggle through or search through other templates, these will always stay up at the top here. Of course, the blank template, you don't get an option. That's always going to be there. I'm going to go ahead and unpin it because it's not one of my faves. And if you don't find it here, you can come up here and look at one of these suggested searches. The more popular ones are for budget, invoice, calendars. And you can see the calendars here and go through all that. Or kind of narrow it down just a bit and say something personal. And that looks like a party calendar. And I'm curious to see how this would look in Excel. Opens it up and says, go ahead and click Create if you like it. And there it goes. Man, and you select one of those cells, you can look up in the formula bar how they have this set up. All right, let's go ahead and click on File, go down to New. And then if you don't find anything in these suggested searches, you can always type it in the search field here. And we'll just type in something simple, invoices. And then just go ahead and scroll down through until you find one that you really love. Like this one, click on it, click Create, and there you go. Now again, if you don't like the colors or the type of font, if the template was set up correctly, well, I can't say correctly, but it was set up with themes in mind, that you can go ahead and change all the font type and the colors in a single click from the Page Layout tab to the Themes group by clicking on the drop-down arrow and choosing another theme. Hey, there you go, that's kind of cool. So we change the colors. You can go ahead and do the different types of fonts as you hover over. If you don't know anything about themes and you want to watch my themes training videos, and then just go ahead and replace it with what it says here, the street address, the city, state, and zip code. If you don't like that, you can go ahead and select them and hit the delete key, get rid of it, or you can shift them around. Again, you can tweak these things, and then when you're done, be sure to click Save. It'll force you to do a Save As. So obviously it won't overwrite the template that was downloaded. I mean, it can't because it's a download here. And you can go ahead and give it a name, find a place on your computer. You can start with the desktop, and then over here on the desktop, find a folder and click Save. You can create a custom template based upon a currently used workbook. And in this example, I've got an invoice. And why would I want to go ahead and create a custom template based upon it? Well, see if this makes sense. When I enter in the information of who we're billing it to and all the products they ordered down below, if it's quite a bit, and then I save it, print it off, and then I go, okay, now we have to bill the next client, I'd have to come back in here, delete all their information, replace it with the new client's information, and change the information down below. I mean, that can be a bit time consuming instead of just having it all blank and then typing in the client's name and not have to clearing out the old information from the previous invoice. So what I can do is I can get rid of all the non-essentials, those things that I don't want to appear on every invoice that's not common. Well, our logo is going to be common. Every person we invoice is going to have our logo. And also, hey, go the extra mile, our slogan, fun. But it always won't be the same invoice number. So you can see that. We'll delete that and get rid of it. And then when I save it as a template, anytime that I want to invoice somebody, it'll be, as you see it here, without all the previous information from another client that I have to get rid of. I can just simply type in or over these fields here that says put the name here, street address, and then save it. And then if I have somebody right after this that I need to invoice, just go ahead and make another copy of this template that we're going to save here. So how do we save it as a template after we cleaned it up? Come up here and you can click on the File tab to go backstage and go to Save As. And then it takes one more step to click on Browse to click on the drop down arrow to find the workbook template, which is right there. Or let me click Cancel. I added to my quick access toolbar the Save As, so when I click on it, opens up the Save As window right off the bat. Let's go to, again, the template here, Excel template. Takes me right to the templates folder, and then I can call it my spiffy invoice, hit enter to save it, and that's it. And then when I go ahead and close out of here, and I'm like, oh, we need to go ahead and send off a new invoice to somebody. Let's open up Excel, double click. Then come up here and click on the File tab, go down to New. Now there's the featured templates, then we have our personal templates that we didn't see in the previous training video because we didn't have anything saved by us as a template. So now that we save something as our own template, we can click on Personal, and there it is, my spiffy invoice. Oh, isn't that fun? Let's go ahead and click on that, and there you go. Hey! And I can just go ahead and type in who I'm billing it to, all their information. I don't have to delete the previous person that we billed it to or delete their previous order here. It's clean, and when I'm done, I can go ahead and click Save. Now when I click Save, notice how it saves it as an Excel workbook by default. The reason why it does that is because so you don't overwrite the original template, because if you click on the drop down arrow and you say, okay, I want to go back to the Excel template, notice even the file name has changed. So even if you get to changing it for some reason, the type from a workbook to a template, and you click Save, it's got a new template name with Invoice 1 from the original just Invoice. So it's trying to take care of you, Excel is, so you don't overwrite the original, and know that it forces you to do a Save As and makes a copy of it. And it's not as a template when you click Save. Again, when you click Save, it's as a workbook. So we're not creating templates based upon templates, although I guess you could, but that's not the purpose of the video here. We want to make sure that we can create a custom template that we can always create a copy of when it comes to invoicing everybody, that we can start from scratch and not have to clean up the previous invoice information from the previous client that we invoiced. The Properties is a place you can go to in any workbook to find more information about it, or information you want to enter in about that workbook. Things like who created it, the editor, author, company name, website, and more. So to go ahead and view the Workbook Properties, just come up here and click on the File tab. Info is selected by default, so just come over to the far right and there you go. You have the size, title, tags, categories. Well, it says over here that you can add a title if you don't have one, or tags, and tags are keywords that are searchable. So in other words, besides the title of the workbook and also everything that you have in the spreadsheet that are searchable, let me click on File again, you can come back here and type in additional keywords to be able to find this workbook. And these keywords can be totally unrelated to the workbook, but if it's something that you want to pull up when somebody searches for these keywords, like this workbook, then just click here where it says Add a Tag, and I'm going to go ahead and type in something really outlandish here. And hit enter. Gibberflu and bison. Okay, it has nothing to do with the workbook here, but the point being, in just a minute, I'll show you that when I search for these keywords, it's going to pull up this workbook to prove to you that it does work. Then, like I said, you got categories when it was last modified, created, the author. You can add an author or right-click on the current author to remove them, or you can get more information if it's available here, and who it was last modified by. Now there are more properties when you click on Show All. I say more because actually there's more than what you see here under the Advanced Properties, which I'll go over in just a minute. You can see all the other fields that are added here. And if I want to see more advanced properties, then I can come up here, click on the Properties drop-down arrow, and there you go, it's right there. But before I do that, I want to show you the Show Document panel. In other words, as it says here, you can edit the properties in the document panel above the workbook. So when you're backstage and you want to add properties here, and you're like, I'm not sure, let me go back to the front stage, and then you read more about it, and you come back here, and then you're like, I just forgot, let me go backstage. It's not really helpful. So if you show Document Panel, it opens up this part of the properties here in the front stage, so you can come down here and go over your spreadsheet and then add comments if you want without having to go backstage to add comments. You can add it right here while it's still fresh on your mind. So in that single click, you could lose some thoughts there, but grateful it's right here. Then in addition to this, you can also click on Document Properties and go down to Advanced Properties. Opens up the window here, or let me go ahead and close out. And to close out of the document panel, click on the X there, go to File, click on Properties to Advanced Properties, brings up the same window. And you got several tabs here. The first is the general, so you've got the type, location, size, when it was created, modified, access, and if your IT person sets it up, it'll also have who created it, and of course who modified it and accessed it. So that way, if you made a mistake, and you're the last one that modified it or accessed it, then you can have your neighbor go ahead and quickly open this up, have them make some modifications, save it, and then it'll be under their name. In any case, let's go to the Summary tab. There you go. Basically the same properties that you see over here that you can update here as well. Then you got Statistics. Again, created, modified, access, last saved by. Now, on a side note, this personal information, like the person's name, it's not going to display here if the previous person or you has used Document Inspector to remove the personal information. So if I close out of here and you come over here and you go check for issues and you go to Inspect Document, when you inspect it, make sure that you save your changes before you can go ahead and do this. Do you want to go ahead and save your file now? Say yes. Opens up Document Inspector, which will inspect for hidden metadata or personal information. Once it finds it, we can click Inspect. It says, do you want to go ahead and remove all of it? If you do that, when I close out, go backstage to Properties, it's going to remove, I would say, most of the properties here. You still want to come back here and check it and verify that your personal information are not still in these fields. And if they are, then go ahead and clear it out. Now, if a person sent you this workbook that was using a previous version of Excel and they checked a box to remove personal information on save, that will clear everything out here as well, which is a double-edged sword, because if you enter personal information, then you click Save, it'll clear it out every time you click Save. How do you fix that? If it's a workbook that you want to keep in an earlier version format, not the latest version, come over here and click on Options. And over here, click on Trust Center to the left-hand side, and then click on Trust Center Settings. Come over here and click on Privacy Options, and it's right there. For earlier versions of Excel, or the Excel workbook created in earlier versions, this would be checked to remove personal information from file properties on Save every time you click Save. So you want to uncheck that if you want to keep everything every time you click Save. Again, that's for earlier versions. When somebody sends you that, and when you click Save, it keeps clearing out all the properties that you don't want to clear out, then remove the check here and click Okie dokie. And we go back to File, again to Properties, Advanced Properties, Statistics, Contents. Now the Contents is going to display the total number of worksheets by name. So we've got one worksheet, the name is Sheet 1, and then any named ranges. I only have one, it's Department. And then finally Custom, where you can go ahead and say, okay, this document was checked by. The type could be text, date, number, yes or no. Well, it's going to be text because we need to type in the name of the person who checked it, and that was me. And then click Add. And that's pretty simplistic, I think, as far as all the names that are available. Or you can just type in your own name and say, and then you can say yes or no, and then select yes or no, and say no, and click on Add. What you can do is you can either come down here and select it and look up in the name box to read it all, or hover in between the two column headers, those labels, until you can get arrows pointing in opposite directions. Then just click and drag to read it all, and click and drag back if you want to see without scrolling over the other columns. And then the other option you get is Link to Content, and what that does is that anytime you have a named range, and like I said, the only named range that I have in this document or this workbook is Department, I can come up here and say that to this name range, let's say that I'm sharing the workbook with Susie, so I can say Susie is in charge of this range of information, the named range, and click Add. And then down below you can see that Susie's linked to that range, and the value of the range is sales. Well, actually, it's not the entire value because it's a range of cells, it's the first value in that range. Let me show you. After I click Okie dokie, go back, click on the name box drop down arrow, there's the name range, select it, takes you right to it, and there you go. The first cell in the range here is sales, and that's the value that you see backstage. File, Properties, Advanced, Custom, and then when you're done you can just go ahead and delete it. Let's go ahead and click Okie dokie, go back, save. And another way you can access the workbook properties besides clicking on the File tab with it open is to close out. Let me go to my exercises folder on the desktop. And that's the Workbook Properties, the name of the file that I'm working on. You can also right-click on it and go down to Properties, go to the Details tab, and you get some of the properties there, like the tags you can search for, when it was last saved, by who or whom. Let's see, Gibberflu and Bison. So if I close out of here and I come up here, it's already been typed because I was doing a test on it, Gibberflu. Hey, it pulls up under the tags there. It's not anywhere in the title or the workbook, but it is still searchable by the keyword Gibberflu. The Custom Views feature is a snapshot you can take of your screen, which will include, if you decide to include, the print settings, hidden columns and/or rows, and filter data. First of all, filter data. So let me go ahead and select my range here. So I can say, okay, this range only, I want to be able to filter it or turn on the auto filter feature. Come up here on the Home tab to the editing group, click on Sort and Filter to Filter so I get the drop down arrows. So for the category, let's uncheck all and choose antibacterial and anti-cancer, click Okie dokie. And I know this is very simplistic, but if you can imagine a huge database where I'm doing a bunch of custom filters here, more than just one category, then instead of doing this every time I want to go ahead and do a custom filter or setting here, I can take a snapshot of it by coming up and clicking on the View tab, going to the Workbook Views group, clicking on Custom Views, and then clicking Add, and then type in the name antibacterial and cancer, and you can see there in this view it only includes print settings, hidden rows, columns, and filter settings. Click Okie dokie. There's the snapshot. So if I come up here, click on the drop down arrow and select all, click Okie dokie so we can go back to where we started. And then I'm like, okay, let's go ahead and look at that custom view that we applied a bunch of filters to. Well, we only applied one, but if we had a bunch of filters, we took a snapshot of it, then just come back up here, select custom views again. So instead of adding, we can select the view and click show. Hey, sweet, that video just paid for itself. So if I go ahead and click on the drop down arrow and select all, click Okie dokie. Well, if I had a lot of categories that were filtered, I don't want to uncheck all of them, so maybe before I actually begin this, I ought to save a custom view of the original view. So come up here, click on Custom Views, click Add, hit Enter. Let's do a couple of more, maybe just one more. Let me go ahead and turn off the auto filter feature here by coming up here on the Home tab to the editing group, clicking on Sort and Filter to deselect filters so it removes those drop down arrows. It also talked about hidden rows or columns, so if I come over here and click on column H to select the entire column through I, right click those columns and say we want to hide them, and say our print range is just going to include the C's, the essential oils that begin with the letter C. So let's come up here and set that print range by clicking on the Page Layout tab, going to the Page Setup group, click on the drop down arrow for Print Area. To set the print area, click off. You can see the line that goes around it. So when I come backstage to File, to Print, it only prints what I set it to print. And let me click on it to zoom in. The essential oils that begin with the letter C. Go backstage, and I can go ahead and save this as a custom view. Come back up here on the Views tab, click Custom Views, say Add, and we'll just say it's a print range. In any case, you get the idea. Click Okie dokie. And then to see all these views, I mean, it's going to take quite a few clicks to toggle. That's kind of annoying. If I come up here, click on Custom Views, there's one click, select it, there's 2 clicks, and then click Show, there's 3. How about if we customize the Quick Access toolbar, come up here and right click on it, go down to Customize, change it from Popular to All Commands, and then scroll down to the C's. We have 2 custom views. One has the drop down arrow, which is what we want, because the other one is to create the custom view. Well, you can create it but also show it, just it's too many clicks. This one allows us just to quickly view the custom views. I would say 2 clicks, where you click on the arrow to choose it, and once you choose it, boom, it's right there. So double click to add it over to the right, click Okie dokie. Hey, there it is. So there's the current custom view that we're looking at or in. If I click on the drop down arrow, go back to the original, it clears it out, no set print area. I get my in-stock and milliliter columns back. And wow, isn't that nice to be able to toggle really fast between all those views? Sweet. And then of course, if you want to get rid of them, just click on Custom Views to select it and then click Delete. Are you sure? Yes. And it's gone, so I just have 2 left. Click on the drop down arrow, just the 2. I first introduced macros in an earlier training video titled Advanced Filter, and I did it because it was very helpful when it came to using that feature. And you can watch that training video. In fact, I strongly recommend that you do watch it, and I do go over some of the basics, so if you've already seen it, you probably have an idea of what we're going to be covering here because this is the formal training video on macros. Having said that, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, what is a macro? A macro is a quick, easy solution to cut down on repeating a task over and over and over again by recording it just once and then saving it as a macro. In fact, simply put, a macro is nothing more than just a bunch of recorded steps that you can quickly execute in a single click or using shortcut keys. So looking at my workbook here, I've got the title on each worksheet and I have a total of 5 worksheets. There's Arizona, here's California, New York, and so on. And what I want to do is I want to go ahead and format the titles of each worksheet, like come up here, make it red, change the font type, the size, underline it. And so I do it just once. I'm going to record those steps and save it as a macro. And then I can come over here on the next worksheet and use the shortcut keys to quickly execute all the formats that I applied to this title on the first worksheet. Now there are many ways you can begin recording your macro. One way is to come up here and click on the View tab, go to the Macros group, click on the drop down arrow, and there it is, Record. Or if you have the Developer tab up, just go to the Code group and there it is, Record. And as you recall, if you don't have the Developer tab up, just right click on the ribbon, go down to Customize the ribbon and check Developer and it will pull. Or you can come down here and customize the status bar by right clicking on it and checking Macro Recording. Now it says recording, but it's not. It says it's not recording, but that adds the icon down below here to the status bar that when I hover over it, you can see it says no macros are currently recording. Click to begin recording a new macro. Okay. And because you may be recording more than one macro, it's a good idea to give it a name. In fact, you can't record it without giving it a name. You can leave it as a generic name, but that's not going to tell me what this macro does. So what I'm doing is I'm going to be formatting a bunch of titles on my worksheets here. So let's keep it simple and say format underscore titles. Now I added the underscore to separate the 2 words because the macro name does not like spaces or other characters. So if it doesn't like it, you'll know when you click on the OK button that it will pull up and it'll give you some error that doesn't tell you that it doesn't like the name. But trust me, you want to go back and redo the name so it doesn't have any special characters in it. At least we're safe with the underscore character, and or you can just slam it all together, but my eye takes a little bit of time to see where one word stops and the other word begins, so I'm going to go ahead and add the underscore. Then the shortcut key, we can use M. I don't want to use P because that's for print, that's already being used. Or if Control M is already being used and I still want to use the letter M, we can add an additional key, like holding down Shift key and hitting the letter M, and so we have to use the combination that allows me to still use M, but using also the Shift key, so it's Control Shift M. Where do you want to store the macro? Is it going to be in this workbook? A new workbook? If you select that and click OK, it'll open up a new workbook for you to store the macro in. I don't want to do that. Then you have the Personal Macro Workbook. Now this Personal Macro Workbook is a hidden workbook. In other words, when you open up Excel, it's going to have this macro copied over into it that's going to be hidden that allows you to go ahead and use that macro in any workbook that you have open. It's like having an invisible servant there that when you hold out your hand, he gives you a glass of water. In this case, he's going to give you a macro, and that's in any workbook because that hidden workbook is going to be there available to quickly give you the macro. It's not going to give it to you. It's going to be showing in your workbook, but it can only be shown when it's linked to the Personal Macro Workbook that's being hidden. We'll go over that a little bit more later on. So to keep it simple, let's do this workbook. And then you can be a bit descriptive if that helps you and say, okay, the formats we're applying is going to be magenta, the font is Comic Sans, the size is 50. Let's just say applying formats to titles of worksheets. That's it. Click Okie dokie and it's recording. Now, it's not recording time, so take all the time you want. It's just recording steps. Now notice that when I started recording, I already had the title here selected. And that's important because if I had a selection down here, and then I said, oh, I want this cell to be formatted, and I jumped up here, it will record me moving from this cell. Well, not where I'm moving from, but where I'm moving to. And so when I execute that macro, it'll actually move to cell A1 of any worksheet. So keep that in mind. And what I wanted to do is I didn't want to have it recording me moving from one cell to the next, so I just started with already having the cell selected. Then I can just come up here, click on the Home tab, go to the font group, and apply my formats like the color red. Let's go ahead and change the size and go to 20, and then change the font type to Monotype Corsiva, hit enter. Ooh, that looks fancy. And then when I'm done, come down here, and notice how that icon has changed to a square. When you hover over it, it says that a macro is currently recording. Go ahead and click on it to stop, or if you come up here on the Developer tab, the icon has changed there from recording to stop. Click on that and it stops it. And then if you want to view the macro, on the Developer tab, you can click on Macros. It brings up the macro window, or close out. You can go to the View tab, click on Macros, brings up the same window. Let's go ahead and click Cancel. And let's test to see if this works. Let's go to the next worksheet, select the title, and let's see what are the shortcut keys. Control Shift M. Sweet. Now, as I mentioned, you can also do it in a single click. If you watch my advanced filter training video and the macro that I used in there, I added a button into the worksheet. We're not going to be adding a button into the worksheet. We're going to be adding a macro button to the Quick Access toolbar. So to do that, you can right-click on it and customize it. Change it from popular commands to, there you go, macros. And it's got all the macros that I have recorded, just one. Double click on it, adds it over to the right. And that icon looks kind of awful. Let's go ahead and change it. With it selected, let's come down here and modify it and choose a symbol like a happy face because we're always happy. And then for the display name, when you hover over the macro, you can go ahead and say something like, to format titles of worksheets, click OK, click OK. Hover over the happy face. There's the display to format titles of worksheets. Let's go to select A1, click on the happy dude. Awesome. Now, if we're done using it and we want to save our workbook, know that macros cannot be saved in your basic workbooks. What I mean by that is that when you create a new workbook, up here, you can see it on the title bar, it's got the extension XLSX. If you want to learn more about extensions, you can watch my Windows training video on extensions, but to keep it simple, the extensions tell the operating system what program is going to open up this file, and it's going to be Excel. And when I save this workbook, now that I have a macro in it, Excel is going to tell me that I have to change and save it to another type of file or file type. Let me show you. Click on Save, and it says these workbooks are going to be macro free. So if you go ahead and click Yes, we're going to delete the macro. I don't want to do that because I still want to use it. So if I go ahead and say no, it says, okay, you have to save it as another file type, and that other file type, when you click on the drop down arrow, is going to be right there, macro enabled workbook. Select it, and you can see the extension, instead of XLSX, it's got the letter M for macro. So it'll still open up the Excel program, but as a workbook that will contain macros. Now, why did Microsoft do this? Because in earlier versions of Excel, you can save the macro in the same basic workbook. The reason why is because macros are a prevalent tool for transferring computer viruses. So Excel requires that all workbooks with macros be saved in the XLSM format to provide increased security. So with two different types of workbooks, if you receive one that's not macro enabled, well, you don't have to worry about macros infecting your computer as far as what Microsoft is telling us here. But if you receive a workbook that has this extension, then make sure that you trust the person before you open it and execute a macro, because if there's a virus there, it could destroy your computer. In any case, it's saving it into my exercises folder. Let's just do the desktop here and click Save. Now it gives me a prompt that says, be careful, parts of your document may include personal information that cannot be removed by the document inspector. So you know what might be a good idea before we save it? Let's click Cancel, and it says the document's not saved. Come up here and click on the File tab, and we covered this in an earlier training video. Info selected by default, come down here and check for issues, inspect the document, And of course it wants us to save it, and we get back to, when we say yes, that it has to be a macro-free enabled workbook. But what it does, if you watch that earlier training video, when it inspects it, it searches for hidden data and properties, and we can go ahead and remove it before we actually save it, because when we actually save it as a macro-enabled workbook, then we have all that personal information eliminated, where it won't allow us to do that, as you saw in that pop-up after it's saved as a macro-enabled workbook. So let's go ahead and say no, and let's save it as the macro-enabled workbook. Again, on the desktop, there it is, macro-enabled. Click Save. Again, we get the warning. That's fine. Click OK. And now it decides to go ahead and run it, so that's all right. I mean, as it said, it won't be able to remove maybe all of the hidden metadata or personal information, but you can still try. And it says it found this. Do you want to remove all? Click on it to remove all, and then go ahead and close out. And hopefully it removed the personal information that you don't want to be shared when you send this off to somebody else, if you send it off to somebody else. So we can go ahead and close out of here. If you want to save it, we can click Save. Again, it's going to warn us about it. That's fine. Close out. It's on my desktop. And you can see that this icon, let me click and drag it over here. It's got that little page with the exclamation point, as opposed to opening up my exercises folder on the desktop. That doesn't have a little page with an exclamation point. So if you don't see your extensions, to find out if that's a macro-enabled workbook, because by default, the operating system is going to hide the extensions so you don't see the XLSM. So you want to look at the icons to make sure it doesn't have. Let me go ahead and change the icons to medium icons, and you can compare between the two there. There's the page with the exclamation point. So if you want to see the extensions and not have to look at the icon, or you just like the comfort of seeing your extensions like I do, again, watch my Windows training video on extensions, and I'll show you how you can not only view them, but how to be careful if you rename your file here that you don't delete or rename the extension. Now let's go ahead and open up the file that contains our macros, the macro-enabled workbook. Double click on it, and you get the security warning that says macros have been disabled. Do you want to go ahead and enable it? Well, do you trust who sent this to you, or did you create the macros? Which, I mean, do you trust yourself? You can go ahead and click on Enable. And if you want to change the warning there, where every time you open up a macro-enabled workbook, you don't get that little message bar, you can come up here and click on the File tab, go down to Options, select Trust Center, come over here and select Trust Center Settings, and then come over here and select Macro Settings, and you get the options here. Disable everything with notification, or do you just not want to see it, not be bothered by it? Or disable all macros except those that are digitally signed, or enable all. They don't recommend that because it could be dangerous if you get a workbook from somebody that you forgot that you had it enabled and you didn't mean to open it up without disabling it first, so you can actually look at the workbook without enabling a macro that may destroy the computer. Let's go ahead and click cancel and close out. Now let me right click on the Excel shortcut in the taskbar and open back up my Macro Basics workbook. And so we're back to where we started. The macro is not in this workbook because remember we did a save as, because we cannot save a macro in the basic workbook here. In fact, if you want to put me to the test, just go to the View tab, click on Macros. There's no macro there. Again, we did a save as. We saved it as another file type, so we still get our original without the macro in it. I know we got the happy face up here, but when you click on it, because there's no macro, it says, what are you doing? So he's not happy. Let's go ahead and right click on the happy face and remove him from the quick access toolbar. And let's do one more. And we'll keep it simple here. Let's select Arizona, click record, and we'll say format. I'm going to brush through this really quick because what I want to highlight, let me add also Shift M, is where we're storing the macro when it comes to a personal macro workbook. Select that, click Okie dokie, and then go ahead and click on the Home tab, and let's apply a few fonts and the size. That's enough right there. Click Stop, and then when I'm done I can go ahead and click Save, and when I click Save, notice that it doesn't give me a prompt saying, hey, wait a second, this is a macro-free workbook. You got to save it as a macro-enabled workbook. The reason being is because when you record your macro and you save it in the personal macro workbook, That's a hidden workbook that opens when you start Excel, and it makes the code available for you to go ahead, or it copies the code over to the workbook or workbooks that you have open. So if I come up here, click on the View tab, go to the Macros group, click on Macros, it's right there in this hidden workbook. So let me go ahead and click Cancel, go to the California tab, select California, and let's go ahead and do the shortcut keys, Control-Shift-M, and it works. Now this is a hidden workbook, so if I come up here on the View tab to the Window group, I can select Unhide, and which workbook do I want unhidden? I'll select that, click Okie dokie, and there it is. This one contains the macro, and so anytime we open up Excel, this is going to open up. In fact, if I close out of here, and I can save it, and I close out of there, and I can save it, and I right click on the icon and select Excel, and I open it up. Let me click on it again to restore it. It opens up the personal macro workbook. I'm like, why is it doing that? Because by default it's supposed to be hidden. So it can open up a copy, a generic copy like Excel Workbook 1, Excel Workbook 2, I mean depending upon how many times I want to open it up. So if I want this to go back into hiding so I don't see it, so I have to come back down here and right click and open up a new workbook to get a generic one to be able to go ahead and do whatever I want. Then, let me close out. In the personal.xlsb workbook, again, the personal macro workbook, click on the View tab and say you want to hide it. So if I go ahead and close out and I save it and I right click on the shortcut on the taskbar to open up the program again, you don't see the hidden workbook. If I come up here and click on the View tab, because the Unhide is an option that I can click on that allows me to go ahead and choose to open it up to view it. So if I don't want certain macros available in all the workbooks that I have open because the personal macro workbook is hidden and it provides me and feeds all the other open workbooks, then I would want to go ahead and unhide it and click Okie dokie. Go to the View tab, click on Macros, select the macros and delete them. Now let's say I don't want to use this anymore. I don't want this hidden workbook when I open up my other workbooks. Deleting a macro or all the macros within it isn't going to stop it. It'll still pull up. Let's go ahead and click Cancel. The way to fix this so it doesn't pull up, let me go ahead and close out and don't save it, is to go ahead and click on the Start button, go to your computer, and I'll give you the address to get to this location where you can delete the startup file that every time you open up Excel, it opens up that hidden personal macro workbook. So it's going to be found on the C drive, double click, find your users, double click, and then the user login name that you use to log into your computer, this is going to be training, and then go ahead and open up app data. Now app data is a folder that's hidden by default, and the only way to show hidden folders is when you're in the window here, hit the Alt key on the keyboard, and you can see the menu is up. Click on the Tools menu, go to Folder Options, click on the View tab, and go ahead to show hidden files, folders, and drives. You can watch my Windows training video on this because I go over it more in depth and some of the things you want to be careful about because there's a reason why it's hiding those files and folders and drives so you don't accidentally delete them. So if you stay on the path with where I'm going in this training video, you should be okay. In other words, don't delete anything as we go down the road here. So double click on the App Data folder to open it up. Go to Roaming, to Microsoft, find Excel, double click, and it's right there. Excel Start, double click, and there's that hidden workbook. Right click on it to delete it. Are you sure? Yes, it's gone. So when I close out, and I close out here, and I right click to open up Excel, it opens up, and when I click on the View tab, the Unhide is not an option that I can select because we deleted that personal macro workbook. That's going to open up every time we open up a workbook. So that's how you can go ahead and fix it and be done with it and not have it always open up. Mind you, if you have macros in it that you like, you just don't want it to open up in your workbook here, you just don't want it available in all the workbooks, there's something else you can do. You can actually copy your macros from one workbook to another. How do you do that? Well, let's go ahead and just save this as a macro-enabled workbook by clicking on the drop-down arrow and going to macro-enabled. And we'll do it to the desktop. There's the one that we saved earlier with just the one macro that we have in it. So we'll just call it this one the empty macro workbook and click Save. So how do you copy a macro from one workbook to another to copy it over here into the empty one? You have to have both workbooks open. The one that contains the macro that you wish to copy and the one that you want to copy it over to. So let's go ahead and minimize this down to the taskbar to be able to access the macro workbook on our desktop, or you don't have to minimize it. You can still restore it and click on the Open folder or click File to open, to the computer, to browse. Well, that's a lot of steps. And double click to open it up. And then what you can do is come up here and click on the View tab, go to the Macros group, click on Macros, and go ahead and click on Edit. Now, this does get into the next training video about editing your macro. We'll just keep it simple here, and then we'll go over it a little bit more in depth in the next training video. When I look over to the left-hand side, how many workbooks do I have open? Well, remember, I've got my empty macro, and then I have the actual workbook that contains the macro in it. And you can see that this one has a plus sign, that when you click on it to expand it, it shows you the folder, and it shows you the objects within that folder, and it doesn't have a module like this one down below does, the module, which is the macro. So to go ahead and to take this module, which contains the macro, and to put it over here in this workbook so it's available there, you can just go ahead and click and drag that and move it over there and just drop it right onto that folder, and there you go. That's it. Just click and drag the modules. It doesn't say macro, and that's fine. Then when you're done, come up here, click on the File menu, go down to Close and Return to Microsoft Excel. Let's go ahead and close out of the one that contains the macro. Again, the title, Macro Basic. Close out to the one that says Empty Macro. Let me type in some text here, and then select it, and Control-Shift-M. Hey, the macro's there. Let's come up here, click on the Macros button, and it's right there. Also, don't forget that you can run the macro from the macro window here. Select it and click on Run. In addition to running it from the shortcut keys or adding the button to the Quick Access toolbar. Thanks for watching. Hey, as a quick reminder, if you like my video, please give it a thumbs up. You can also click on me and subscribe to my channel to get notified of the latest videos. And for great specials on my products, please see the description below this video.